Thor stood defiant beneath storm-black skies, Mjolnir trembling in hand. He had pledged allegiance to a power older than Asgard's throne. The Allfather's wrath ignited like wildfire across realms. Odin, betrayed, summoned the Valkyries and the Wild Hunt. Brother against brother, faith against fate. Thor's loyalty had shifted, but not his sense of justice. The gods clashed in the shadows of Yggdrasil's roots. In the end, blood would sanctify a new pantheon. Asgard was quiet, but not at peace. Thunder rumbled where no clouds lay. Thor stood on the edge of the Bifrost, Mjolnir hanging heavy at his side, not from weariness, but from the weight of decision. For centuries, he had waged war in Odin's name. He had crushed monsters, toppled empires, enforced the Allfather's will with godlike fury. But the screams, of mortals, of fallen gods, of innocence caught between power and pride, still echoed in his mind. And lately, they'd been growing louder than thunder. He had questions. Odin gave none. Obedience is survival, the old god barked. The 9 realms need order. But what Thor saw wasn't order, it was control. Endless war disguised as prophecy. Peace built on fear. And he was the weapon that kept it sharp. So Thor vanished. Left behind the shining halls of Valasjaf and the hollow cheers of warriors who mistook conquest for glory. He wandered past the edge of known realms, deeper than hell, farther than Muspel. Beyond even the stars, he found it, a presence not chained to fate, not born from Yggdrasil. Elyon. A god older than the Norse cycle. One who whispered not power, but balance. Where Odin demanded worship, Elyon offered clarity. Where Asgard ruled through force, Elyon taught harmony through choice. Kneeling was not easy for Thor. But that day, he did. Not out of weakness, but rebellion. Not against Asgard, but against what it had become. The moment it happened, the cosmos trembled. In Asgard, Odin felt the rupture like a dagger to the chest. He's abandoned the Aesir, he snarled, eyes burning with ancient rage. He's bent the knee to an outsider. My own blood. The ravens circled violently. Gungnir pulsed in his hand. This wasn't just treason, it was a declaration of war. He summoned the Valkyries. Summoned Tyr. Summoned fire and fury. Thor Odinson is no longer my son, Odin roared before the council. He is a threat to the 9 realms. A traitor. A false god's puppet. Bring me his head, or I will unmake the world until I find him. Even Loki, ever the cynic, flinched. Across the realms, the news spread like wildfire. Thor has forsaken Odin. The Thunderer has found a new god. Some cheered. Some panicked. The other pantheons watched in silence, curious, calculating. Because if the Prince of Asgard could defy fate, perhaps fate could bleed. And Thor? He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stood taller. Not as Odin's hammer, but as a storm of his own making. Let them come. Odin didn't sleep. Gods didn't need rest, but even if they did, betrayal burned hotter than any dream. His son, his hammer, his legacy, had bowed to a foreign god. The shame was volcanic. The fury, divine. He stood at the heart of the throne room, face carved from ancient stone. The realms think me old, he growled. But I am still the end of worlds. Frigga begged for patience. He's lost, not disloyal. Odin didn't blink. He's made a choice. Now I make mine. Ravens screamed across Yggdrasil. Gungnir slammed to the ground. The golden halls shook. Odin summoned the council, Tyr, Heimdall, Sif, the generals, the seers, the war-hardened. His words echoed like thunder without lightning. Thor Odinson has fallen from grace. He kneels before a nameless deity, foreign to our pantheon, hostile to our power. This is not rebellion. It is infection. A hush fell. Even Tyr, the war god with blood on every blade, looked uncertain. Heimdall stepped forward, hesitant. He is still the protector of Midgard, he has shed no blood. Odin turned slowly. He has shed loyalty. That is worse. In secret, a hit list was carved into stone. Thor's allies were monitored. The Valkyries were sent first, not to kill, but to find. To watch. To judge. But Thor was no fool. He had learned from Odin himself, strike first, or don't strike at all. He vanished again, until a dozen Valkyries vanished, too. Burned silhouettes in forgotten corners of the realms. Not dead. Just defeated. Left alive, to deliver a message. I will not kneel again. That was enough. Odin ordered the hunt. A full warband of Einherjar, the undead warriors of Valhalla, was pulled from their endless feast and given one task: bring back Thor, dead if necessary. Tyr volunteered to lead them. Not because he hated Thor, but because he believed in the old ways. If the son breaks the law, Tyr said coldly, the sword is the law. Loki watched in the shadows, amusement curled at the edges of his grin. Interesting, he murmured. Odin makes a tyrant of himself, Thor plays the heretic, and the realms become a chessboard. Finally, a story worth telling. Even the other gods whispered now. Zeus. Anubis. Quetzalcoatl. They watched Asgard's drama unfold with morbid fascination. If the mightiest of Odin's sons could fall, what was left of the balance? On earth, the skies cracked. Mortals felt it, though they didn't know why. Storms rose without cause. Oceans churned. And in a forgotten corner of the cosmos, Thor stood beneath twin moons, lightning pulsing through his veins, not from rage, but revelation. They would come for him. He knew. But this wasn't fear. This was clarity. He would not run. He would make them choose. Not between gods. But between blind rule, and something greater. The hunt began at dawn, but Thor was already moving. Tyr led the charge, golden armor blazing, a legion of Einherjar marching behind him, undead warriors bound by oath and wrath. They had chased monsters, demons, even gods. But never one of their own. Never Thor. The Bifrost flared, but Thor wasn't waiting in Asgard. He was in Alfheim first, the light realm, where even the flowers whispered of betrayal. Elven scouts tried to hide him. It didn't matter. Tyr burned the forest anyway. Anyone who shields the traitor, he announced, shares his fate. When they arrived, Thor was already gone. All that remained was a rune carved into stone: you hunt the storm. It does not flee. It strikes. Next, Vanaheim. Lush jungles. Ancient gods of nature who once taught Thor peace. Now they turned their backs, fearful of Odin's reach. But still, they left open paths. Sacred ones. Paths Thor used to disappear again, barely leaving footprints. But he wasn't hiding. Every time Tyr's forces closed in, Thor struck. Fast. Clean. Relentless. He destroyed a warship in Svartalfheim, crushed its engines with a single blow, then vanished before the fire caught the sky. He shattered 3 Einherjar in Jotunheim using only thunder and bare fists, leaving the rest frozen in fear beneath glaciers. This wasn't rebellion anymore. It was a war of wills. Old order versus awakened power. Tyr raged. He was raised by us. Fed by us. Trained by us. He is ours. But even his soldiers began to question. What god bleeds the world to silence one voice? Back in Asgard, Loki laughed. You've made him a legend, father. Every swing of your sword writes his gospel. Odin said nothing. But his knuckles cracked over Gungnir. He felt it, Yggdrasil itself beginning to tremble. Realms shifting. Fates twisting. Thor's defiance wasn't just rebellion. It was rewriting the threads. And in the shadows of forgotten realms, other gods began to stir. Thor reached the Cradle of Echoes, a place even Odin feared. It was said to reflect one's true self, raw and unfiltered. There, Thor communed again with Elyon. Not in words, but through silence. Through storms. Through visions of a world where God served life, not ruled it. When he emerged, his lightning had changed. Sharper. Bluer. No longer Asgard's fury, but Elyon's balance. Tyr found him days later, in the ruins of an old battlefield where Thor once earned his first scar. The two faced each other. Brother and brother. Blade and storm. Come home, Tyr said. We can make this right. Thor didn't answer. He raised Mjolnir. The sky broke. The lightning came. And the hunt became war. The sky over Yggdrasil went black. Not from clouds, but from power. Raw, ancient, unfiltered. Storms howled across the 9 realms. Mortals trembled under thunder without rain. Gods held their breath. At the roots of the world tree, where fate is braided into reality, Thor waited. No armor. No crown. Just Mjolnir, gripped tighter than ever. Lightning pulsed from his eyes. Not fury, focus. Not vengeance, clarity. He had not come to beg. He had come to end it. Then the air split. Odin arrived, not walking, but descending in a pillar of gold fire. Gungnir burned in his hand like a dying star. The ravens circled above, silent for the first time in eons. The Allfather didn't speak. He stared at Thor as if seeing a stranger. A son who had outgrown the chains disguised as heritage. You kneel to a false god, Odin said at last, voice deep enough to shake the bark of the world tree. Thor didn't flinch. I rose for a better one. Odin's eye glowed. You would destroy all we've built for a whisper from the void? I would destroy anything, Thor said, stepping forward, that demands obedience over truth. The ground cracked. Odin struck first. A wave of pure force exploded from Gungnir, tearing bark from Yggdrasil, ripping craters in the earth. Thor took it full on, flew back, thunder screaming from his body, but he rose. Bleeding. Laughing. Mjolnir spun once, and the storm answered. Lightning slammed down in 1,000 streaks, white-hot and screaming. The roots of the cosmos trembled as God clashed with God. Mjolnir met Gungnir again and again, divine steel colliding like fate against will. Odin summoned the power of every battle he'd ever won. Thor summoned every soul crushed in Odin's name. They tore through time itself. The echoes of their blows reached Midgard, cracked glass in temples across earth, whispered into the dreams of children who would one day wield power. Frigga wept alone. Loki watched from afar, half smiling, half afraid. He saw what others refused. This wasn't a fight for survival, it was a fight for legacy. And Odin was losing. Because for every blow he landed, Thor rose stronger. Not from strength, but conviction. Odin fought for control. Thor fought for freedom. Finally, Thor stood over him. The Allfather, bruised, gasping, broken beneath a sky that no longer answered his call. Mjolnir hovered inches from his chest. Do it, Odin spat. Prove me right. But Thor lowered the hammer. No, he said. That's your way. Mine ends here. And with that, he turned his back on the man who made him, and walked into the storm. Not as Odin's son. But as something new. Odin fell. Not dead, but broken. The Allfather, who once ruled the 9 realms with iron certainty, now lay silent beneath Yggdrasil's roots. The ravens didn't return. Gungnir dimmed in his hand, as if even the spear knew its time was over. Thor didn't look back. He walked into the storm he'd summoned, into the silence that follows gods who defy destiny. Lightning trailed behind his steps like threads of unchained fate. He had no army. No throne. No father. And yet, every realm watched. Because when a storm walks away from war, the world takes notice. Asgard shook. Not from collapse, but from change. The golden towers still stood, but their shadows no longer stretched with fear. The council was silent. Even Tyr bowed his head, the war in his heart finally still. Frigga mourned, not because she lost a son, but because she knew he could never come home. Not to the past. Not to the old ways. Thor had not abandoned Asgard. He had outgrown it. The 9 realms responded in whispers first. Then roars. In Alfheim, the elves laid down their bows for the first time in centuries. In Midgard, ancient temples burned incense to a new name, not Elyon, not Thor, but balance. Not fear, not power, but choice. Mortals felt it in the winds, the storms, the spaces between silence and thunder. They didn't know the details. They didn't need to. But somewhere deep in their bones, they understood. The storm no longer served the throne. It served them. Thor didn't crown himself. He didn't sit in Odin's seat. He didn't build temples. He didn't ask to be followed. He simply wandered. Realm to realm, not as a ruler, but a reminder. That gods who demand worship fear irrelevance. But gods who protect without chains, they reshape everything. And though he bore Mjolnir still, it wasn't the hammer that defined him now. It was the silence in his wake. The questions he left behind. The way kings and conquerors grew nervous when thunder rolled, and looked over their shoulders. Because the god of storms no longer brought war. He brought reckoning. In time, songs were sung. Not of battles won, but of a god who refused to kill a tyrant. Of a son who defied legacy to build something gentler. Of thunder that asked for nothing but truth. Elyon never appeared again. Maybe it was never about a new god at all. Maybe Thor was never meant to serve another. Maybe the storm was always meant to be free. And in that freedom, a new age was born, not ruled by gods, but guided by those who remembered. Power without mercy becomes rot. But mercy with power? That becomes legend.